What is an appropriate way to manage funds between a couple in a household? So you're married and you have income. How should you manage the finances between yourselves? So the most important thing is whatever system you have, that you both sign up to it, you both agree it. And sometimes it really is that. You might have to do not a legal contract, but a contract between yourselves to just lay out what it is that you're agreeing to do. Similar to your wedding vows. Sometimes you might need professional help to draft something, but often it's not needed. So what is an appropriate way to manage funds between a couple in a household? The first thing is, what's appropriate is that they should work out between themselves how best to do this. So the questioner asks gives some kind of circumstances. Circumstance 1. In both cases where one partner is working and the other isn't working, or where both are working and the salaries are not equivalent. So you have two questions. What should you do with the finances? And I'm saying it depends on the family situation, how you do that separation. And the questioner says, what happens if only one of them is working and the other one isn't working? Or both of them are working, but their salary is, I'm going to just say, substantially different. The writer says they're not equivalent. I don't think anybody would argue if someone was on 49,000 and someone was on 47,000, there's not much of a discrepancy. But if someone was on 15 and someone was on 55, there'd be a huge disparity. And the person on 55,000 would perhaps be concerned about sharing their money with someone on a much lower wage. So the questioner asks, what is appropriate? I want to suggest, first of all, transparency is appropriate, so that each of you know how much the other earns. I think having a budget is essential, a budget that both of you have agreed upon in your marriage relationship, and that you review that agreement and always maintain to repair it or stick to that agreement. I think it's always the better option, if you're going to marry someone, to share your finances, by which would almost certainly mean a joint bank account. Some people don't have a joint bank account. Some people have their own separate account and a joint bank account, and they apportion their money in that way. So different families have different ways of dealing with this. So my main purpose in answering this question and to even discuss it is that it's an important one for us to discuss. And what I want to say to people is, in a marriage relationship, a partnership, it's not about who earns the money. So if one of the spouses earns money and the other one doesn't, the one that's earning the money can't turn around and say, well, I earned all the money and therefore you receive nothing. Now, a few years ago in the courts, this was a very prevalent issue. Until a few years ago, when it was deemed that in a case of separation or divorce, when the couple would separate, if one of them had been earning for 20 years and the other one hadn't earned any money, the courts would then be in favour of there still being an equal or 50-50 split between the finances. And this should give us a clue on how to behave. So whether or not one spouse works and the other one does not, obviously it depends upon the reason, but 99.9% there is a reason for that. And often it's because the couple have chosen to do so. Then to me, it would be reasonable and it would be fair that the way you manage your funds would be together. It's not a matter of who earns the most money. That can't be the correct solution. when we're supposed to be trying to work as a team in a family. Next question. Is there such a thing as incompatibility, or is it always due to a reluctance from one party to make things work? So I think actually there is such a thing as incompatibility. I think it exists, but maybe it's not as important or severe as we might think. So what could make a couple incompatible? In fact, first you'd want to ask, what would make a couple compatible, before you would try to address the issue of what makes someone incompatible. So when you find someone and you want to enter into a relationship, what you need to ascertain is, what is it that you like about this person? There must be something that you find in this partner that you appreciate, that you like. And I want to call that, in a very simple way, compatibility. There's something in this person that you appreciate, that you like, and you find is compatible with you. Now, I don't know how many of you are in courtships currently, or have been married, or are thinking of being married, but I'm sure we all know that there are tests that you can do. There are many tests, compatibility testing, that, again, I think are relatively effective, or at least relatively useful. They're not going to be definitive, but they do help to steer you in the right direction if they are run properly and they're a good test. So that's the first thing I want to say, is that is there such thing as incompatibility? Yes, there is. There are some people who are just not compatible one with another. But I also want to suggest that it's not as common as you might think, this issue about incompatibility. Most of us are flexible enough that we could be with a range of different people. I don't mean at once, I mean that we would be compatible with, that would make good partners for us if we just pursued them and gave that relationship a chance. There's another question, perhaps we'll get to it next week, I'm not sure, that speak to this issue of whether or not there is this single person in the world for me, this Mr. or Mrs. Right, just for me, and that I just need to find them and everything will be okay. And this issue of compatibility or incompatibility is really a similar issue, it's just reworded. So is there such a thing as incompatibility? There certainly is. But I don't think it's as marked as some of us might think. Is it always due to reluctance from one party to make things work? That may be the case, but I don't think it's always the situation. I don't think it's always the case that people don't get along with one another, that they're incompatible in the way that I've suggested. So the question says, is it always due to the reluctance of one party to make things work? And I'm saying it's not. However, if we could understand what are the fundamental driving forces that each of us as human beings need, and if we just think about affection and love, the desire for companionship, if we think about those things as the undergirding principle that drives every single one of us, then at least there is a partial issue here that the reason why couples don't get along with one another is not because they're incompatible, it's because there's an inability. The questioner says the reluctance. Sometimes it's not reluctance, sometimes it's an inability for one, often both of the partners, to be able to actually behave properly. And what I mean by that is, as the questioner asked, to make things work. Sometimes both spouses are not willing to make things work, and they're not willing to make things work because I want to suggest that they don't understand how relationships work, because they don't understand the nature of humanity, the nature of man. It's not because they're necessarily incompatible. We know that incompatibility isn't really a reality, because there are far too many situations where people have married and then not long after, either rightly or wrongly, they find someone else. They become interested in someone else, a friend or a work colleague, and as I say, I'm not justifying this. The spouse may have died and they may have found a legitimate second partner, or the spouse may be alive and they've entered into an illicit relationship. I'm not suggesting that these are acceptable, they're not. What I am trying to demonstrate is that there is no such thing about this incompatibility issue for most people. There are situations where some people are incompatible, but most of the time it's because people don't actually understand how relationships work. And if you did, and you're a woman, there's probably a wide range of men that you could marry, that you could, as the question frames it, be compatible with. So the main underlying problem is that people don't understand what are the drivers in a relationship. And because they don't understand what drives a relationship that cements it into one, the questioner says there's a reluctance to make it work. I don't think there's reluctance, I think there's an inability, a lack of education, because people don't even know how to make relationships work, and therefore they assume that, you know what, they're incompatible with a partner. A few weeks ago, I mentioned a TEDx talk about a woman who said that what you really need to do is marry yourself. That's what everybody should be doing, marrying themselves. And what she meant by that is understanding herself. She gave the example that she'd been in 3 marriages, all failed, all broken, and now she was in her 4th. It was a relationship at that moment. It may or may not have turned into a legal marriage. But after those 3 failed marriages, she began to understand herself, who she was, what drove her. She became more honest about her wants, her needs, how they could and should be fulfilled. And as she began to know herself, then she could find someone to meet them, because she saw that her needs were so important. She was able to speak about them to potential partners and basically explain to them what her needs were. And that made her compatible with her new partner. And I'm suggesting that if she was willing or able to do that before, she probably could have made it a go. She could have probably made a go of it with her previous 3 spouses. So there is incompatibility. It's rare. Most of the time, it's not that people are reluctant to make it work. It's they don't know how to make it work. And the reason they don't know how to make it work is because most people don't understand what the fundamental drivers are of human health. It's receiving affection and warmth and love. And if we all understood that and were able to give it, I think we would have fewer broken marriages, and this idea of incompatibility would be a much rarer thing than it currently is. Next question. What should a couple do if childhood issues are conflicting with the relationship during a courtship? Should couples still try to get married to work things out? I don't think marriage is going to work anything out, to be honest. I think if someone, first of all, I want to say this, that for someone to actually recognize that they have childhood issues is a major step in the healing of that individual, that actually make that recognition. The second thing is, or the second point is, if not only they recognize it, their spouse recognizes it. So you both recognize that something happened in that person's childhood which is affecting the way they behave today. So I think both of those two things, if that was happening, you've made some major breakthroughs. And the third thing is, if that could happen before marriage, that would be almost miraculous. So, if you can understand what's happened in your past, you're able to explain it and explore it with your partner, and you can do all of that before marriage. That to me would be the ideal situation. So it says, what should a couple do if childhood issues are conflicting and the relationship conflicting with the relationship during a courtship? So for them to actually recognize that it is that, I think is a major breakthrough. And if a couple can go that far to actually recognize something, I think they'll be in a good place to actually address or deal with the issue. So the question is, how would they deal with the issue? And I think more often than not, they need to speak with a marriage counselor. There are good resources available. They help to guide you through an understanding of what has gone wrong in your life, what might be going wrong in your relationship, how people have misconceived ideas about how to deal with problems. So there are self-help books that are good. There are people in the movement that could help. But certainly there are people in the world who can help you to go through these issues. Should they still contemplate getting married? Sometimes they may want to put a hold on to that. More often than not, I suspect what happens is when the people begin to see the fruit of these childhood troubles, they wouldn't readily want to marry either of them, perhaps neither of them. So people should be really cautious about childhood conflicts and how to deal with them, and be careful about rushing into a marriage relationship. It's far better to deal with those things during a courtship. And if courtship was done well, properly, I would suggest that these things can begin to be dealt with in a courtship, which is the proper place to address those issues as best as you're able to. Far too often people, and this question comes up over and over again, I think I've still got a few questions coming up on this issue. Part of the problem with being physically close with someone, it doesn't even mean you're sleeping with them, having physical contact with people can make it difficult to address some of these issues. For instance, one of the potential spouses, one of you feel anxiety, and if you were to get a cuddle, perhaps even a kiss, that anxiety kind of temporarily melts away and you feel better and you can function. And that's all good and well. But what can tend to happen is when you become married, those anxiety levels may rise to such a degree because of the stresses that are occurring in your life. When you get married, stressful things happen. That a simple hug won't help. And then you can begin to wonder what has gone wrong. And what's happened is that anxiety, which was resolved temporarily through a hug, has been masked, has masked what the underlying cause of that problem was. So it's a real problem about physical contact in courtship, because it can alleviate or temporarily alleviate the symptoms of childhood issues which exhibit themselves as anxiety, and sometimes the person who is anxious may not even make the connection themselves. So that's why it's difficult. And if you are having these conflicts, to try to deal with them, then I've explained how. There are some people who decide that they can't take that pressure, they can't handle that pressure, and in cases such as that, then you shouldn't proceed on forward onto marriage. You should break the courtship and move on in your life, and not to follow through if you feel that you can't deal with those childhood issues, if they're not working through. Whichever, if you're the one who was hurt in childhood, or you're the one that your spouse or your potential spouse was the one that was damaged, wherever you find yourself, I think we should be very careful about moving forward. In prior dispensations, as Christians, even as Seven Day Adventists, it has been taught that the man is to pursue the woman. But now, with our understanding of equality, is it okay for the woman to pursue the man? This is prior to being in a relationship. In the United States, I don't know if this person is American, in the United States, especially among Christians, the woman is looked upon as desperate if she initiates a relationship with a man. What if the woman decides to propose to the man instead of vice versa? So, fortunately for this person, whether you live in America or a different country, first of all, I don't think there are huge discrepancies culturally on this issue, whichever continent you live on. But this person is going to marry someone who's in the movement, potentially. I don't know if this is a man or a woman, but it's addressed from the position of a woman. So this sister, whether she's from America or not, will be looking for a man, a brother, who's in the movement. And as both of you are being taught the subject of equality, if you went up to your man, the one that you like, and you were to ask them if they would want to enter into a courtship, then if that man thought you were desperate, and obviously desperate is a kind word, and think there are much more worse expletives than that, that you could call a woman who was forward enough to do that, then you would know that that man is actually failing in the midnight cry message. So, in the world, even in Christianity, in Adventism, for a woman to come and ask a man, she would be considered a forward woman, a woman who is either not to be trusted or she's desperate. There's something wrong with her. But in the movement, such a woman would not be viewed that way. Generally, if she were viewed that way by the man, by that brother, then to me that would be indicative that that man, that brother, is actually failing the midnight cry message. And perhaps it would be a good test, if you're a woman and you like a man, if they said, oh, that's a bit strange, you shouldn't be asking me, it's not your job, or you're a bit forward or a bit desperate, you would know then that that man was failing the midnight cry message, and perhaps you should run a mile. So there is another thought I want to add to this, though. Now, again, this question comes up over and over again. It's in my list of questions that I've got to address, and it's this. There are so few people in the movement, and it gets lower and lower. There's hardly anybody around. So how do you even find someone to marry? Especially with COVID-19, and we can't at the moment have any physical camp meetings, it becomes very difficult to get to know somebody. And this is not a new issue. It's been discussed time and time again. If you've watched any of my presentations in the past, I think I'd refer you to an 11-part series in France done in 2018. In that 11-part series, I talk about some important research that I came across a while ago. It was in a book. I didn't see the original research. I'm not trying to say I saw the original research, but it's in I thought, a reputable book. I can't remember the name of the book, so don't ask. But it was in dealing with relationships. It gave this idea that we, when we use this idea of mind meets mind, or as one of the questioners asked a minute ago, compatibility. Do you have compatible minds? And we meet people on many levels. It's not just mind meeting mind, it's also body meeting body. And I think we have completely missed the mark. We have been untrue to our own humanity when we have ignored the fact that we are physical human beings. As conservative Adventists, many of us have had the erroneous idea that as long as we marry someone with a good personality, we can get along. If we don't find this person physically attractive, and let's use some crass language, some vulgar language. If you don't find the person sexy, if you don't find them physically stimulating, you should be extremely, extremely cautious about entering into a marriage relationship with them. The old saying is true. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Every single one of us can find someone who will find us attractive. There is someone out there who will find you attractive. There will always be someone, and more than one. So I just want to make this point that if you're not physically attracted to this person, if I wanted to say it mildly, I'd say you should be very cautious about moving forward. If I wanted to be blunt and honest, I would say that you should not move forward. It's an extremely dangerous proposition to enter into a relationship with someone that you do not find physically attractive. And you could, depending on what culture you're from, what country you're from, how old you are, there are different terms. Whether you have a crush on them, that you fancy them, people might use the term that you have chemistry with them, or there's a spark. However you want, whatever term you want to use, these are all synonyms of the same thing, that there must be some physical attraction. If you don't have that, you'll get into problems, because I think it's denying a large part of our humanity. If you want to just take it as simple maths, if you think that our human nature is threefold, mental, spiritual and physical, you're denying 1/3 of your humanity to ignore the physicalness of the person that you're intending to marry. And I would suggest that 1/3 in many ways is probably the most important, because it's where you first connect, and for most of us it's where you last connect with a person. If you don't find them physically connected, physically attractive, it's very hard to connect with someone. It really is difficult. So the reason why I mentioned all of that is in the studies on courtship and marriage that I did 2 years back, I made the assertion that when you meet someone and you find them attractive, you get an hormonal response, chemistry, whatever you want to call it, some spark happens, a twinkle in your eye, your eyes meet and something happens. You feel lightheaded, you feel good, your heart begins to race. When you start feeling like that, that is the first sign that this person has some level of compatibility, which is why I said before there are some people who are not compatible, and I didn't address the issue of physical incompatibility. And what I mean by that, I don't mean a well-rounded man and a petite woman, or vice versa. I don't mean physical in that sense. I mean physical incompatibility in the sense that you don't find that partner attractive. You have to find them attractive. Without that, you will not have sufficient compatibility to take you through the ups and downs of life. Fortunately, all of us have a wide range, a wide variation in whom we would find attractive. People ask, I've been asked, am I more attracted to blondes or brunettes? I've been asked, am I more attracted to white women or black women? And an individual person may have some of those preferences, but I think most people, if they said, well, I really like blondes, if they found a beautiful redhead, talking about a woman finding a beautiful redheaded man, they could fall in love with them. They could find them physically stimulating and attractive. So even though people might think that they've got these preferences, in reality, I don't think those preferences are hard and fixed as some people think they are. But we do need to be attracted to people. And the point that I want to make on that is Ellen White uses this term, love-sick sentimentalism. Love-sick sentimentalism. And she talks about it in a negative way. I want to talk about it in a positive way. I want to say that love-sick sentimentalism cements a relationship in a way that nothing else can. It's essential to a marriage to have this love-sick sentimentalism, to look at your partner and be attracted to them, to be proud to be with them in public, not to be embarrassed or ashamed. All of these are facets or are all clues that you really do like the physical appearance of this person. And why I say that is I think it's important that people first of all have that physical attraction. Now, what research has found is that this rush, this euphoric feeling, does not endure over the years. That people, when they meet someone, they find them, all their blemishes that they have, if you saw some for the first time and you just had eyes for them, you would not notice many of their blemishes. It would take you 3, 4, 5, 10 times that you'd have to meet them to begin to notice, to say, oh, I didn't notice that scar or that defect, or the way they walk, or an idiosyncrasy in the way that they speak, some kind of defect that you think, oh, that doesn't look as attractive. How did I miss it before? It's normal that you miss things. So science has shown us that this lovesick sentimentalism lasts a period of time and then begins to fade. And it lasts around 12 to 18 months. It varies from person to person, but it's around that kind of time period. So when you first meet someone and you think, wow, they are nice, it's far safer to wait 12 to 18 months before you ever did anything. What I mean by do anything, before you ever venture to even ask them to enter into a courtship relationship with you. And I think far too many people don't do that. What they do is they meet someone or hardly ever met them, and then they've heard about Christian courtship and the fact that we have to stifle our human passions, and they put them all to one side and they say, well, let's do a business deal and let's go into a courtship, without really understanding or knowing the person. And if you have done that prematurely, what will happen is that lovesick sentimentalism will kick in a courtship, and you can get into problems. So the first thing I want to say is, whether you're a man or a woman and you want to ask someone to enter into courtship with you, you should wait before doing that a good length of time. 12 to 18 months is a good length of time. If you meet them on a fairly regular basis, in lockdown in the way we currently have, it becomes quite difficult. I could say, well, all you need to do is do video conferencing and chats and calls on a more frequent basis. They do work to a degree, but there are some traps about online relationships. I don't know if any of you have a self-awareness of this, but I've noticed people are a lot more lucid. That means they're a lot more free with their thoughts or their emotions than they are when they're in real life. I've seen this over and over again. In fact, when you chat with someone compared to when you ring them on the phone, they sound like completely different people. And people are much more warm, much more open, much more generous in their affections when they're chatting than they are when they're speaking. And especially so when you meet them in the flesh, they're much more circumspect, much more reserved. So there is that inherent problem with online relationships. I don't have any solutions to this because I didn't create COVID-19. I didn't create this pandemic and with its lockdown. It is difficult to manage. So I would say, if you're a woman, you can, by all means, go ahead and speak to that man that you are attracted to and propose to them. Now the person says, well, if the woman decides to propose to a man, I don't know if this person is talking about proposal for courtship or proposal for marriage. I presume proposal for courtship, because if you've been in the courtship for 18 months and you're in this movement, neither of you are going to think, actually, what's wrong with this woman? She's proposing to me and I wanted to do that. So I think this is proposal for courtship. That's how I would understand it. Again, I say I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but what I do caution against is for all the sisters now who are listening to say, I've got permission now to propose entering into a courtship with that man that I really liked all of this time, because you may not have met the man enough times. And obviously the question is about the woman proposing to a man, so I don't want to do a vice versa, but obviously we understand that to be the vice versa. So there is no problem in a woman leading out in proposing. Also want to say that, in any activity, if you're married, we have married couples here, for a woman to initiate intimacy with her husband isn't something to be ashamed of or isn't wrong. It's not only acceptable, it's something that's healthy and good if they can do that. Next question. What should be the expectations for people who are not married and are friends of the opposite sex? How should one expect to be treated in those relationships? Of course, with equality and respect, they understand that, but how much affection should a friend of the opposite sex expect from the other if they are just friends and not married or dating. This is not referring to anything physical. So the...
Sorry.
10 minutes to go.
Yeah, we've got 10 minutes. So
Okay. Thank you. So you're in friends with a person. It's a platonic relationship. That's how I've understood this question. So obviously you're not going to go smooching with them or kissing them. That's fine. But how intimate, how friendly can you get with someone of the opposite sex? Now, different cultures do this differently. I've had to go through some learning curves on this. Being, I don't know, maybe this is the wrong way of saying it, to be a reserved British conservative Adventist. So, you know, when I've gone to different cultures and I've seen the level of physical contact or intimacy that they would have, for instance, kissing, for sure hugging. I know that different cultures across the world, without identifying them, are more open about expressing physical contact than other nationalities are. I know conservative Americans are really standoffish from, you know, any kind of touching. The best that you might be able to expect from them is a handshake, if that. But often they won't even do that. They'll keep their distance and they just don't want any physical touch. So the question is, how far can you go with your friends who are of the opposite sex, and it's just a friendship that you have? Can there be touching? So I've come to a place where I don't think there's actually anything particularly wrong with giving a friend the occasional hug when you meet them, or when you part from them. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong in men and women interacting with one another. I think we have to be careful about how close we get to people, and that we don't masquerade that you actually physically are attracted to someone under the guise of, well, we're just friends, really. But separate to that, if you are really friends, I don't think it's good to remain separate and to have this distance. I'm not saying we have to hold hands and have intimate contact and put your hand around someone's waist, but I think being physically close with people, sitting next to them on a sofa, for instance, taking a picture where you're really close and you may even have your arms around, if you're a man, a female friend, I don't think that is sinful or wicked or evil. I know that in times past, in recent times, in fact, this has been looked on in a very negative way, and people have shunned and said that there's something wrong with people where they have taken pictures standing next to brothers and sisters, just taking a picture where they've put their arms on their shoulder or stood close to them. I really think much of that prudishness is actually detrimental and harmful. And I think it goes back to this idea that there should be as much distance between men and women as possible. And I want to remind us that just the Seven Day Adventist, way back in the 19th century, this is in the Victorian age, and I know that's a British term, but most people understand what that means. Adventism is one of the major, if I could call them, organizations that believed in co-education, mixed education, where boys and girls would be educated together, that they weren't separated in boys and girls schools. And Ellen White doesn't make a big deal about it. It just seems to be something that happens, and I think that should be a real clue to us about the advantages in men and women, boys and girls, actually mixing around people of the opposite gender so that they actually understand and know them. I think it's a tragedy where we have young people, and I think it's can especially happen in homeschooling situations where you have people of one gender where they actually never even get to properly interact with people of the opposite gender. So if you have a family that has got 2 daughters and they're living in the country, it may be very rare that they would ever actually, it may never happen that they properly learn to interact with boys, and vice versa. And I think that is actually detrimental to them. It's not something that's positive. So I think this idea of keeping people separate from one another is not a good idea. If you were to ask how many men in this movement understood how a woman's body operates, I think boys, you'd find that men have pretty much no idea about how things work. Even husbands don't. You can find couples who are married, perhaps for a decade or longer, that the husband doesn't even understand the reproductive cycle of a woman. This idea of a woman's menstrual cycle or her period is like a taboo subject that people feel ashamed to talk about, that it's something that's dirty. So it's all this idea that everything's sort of tucked away and made to look shameful and bad. I think it's harmful. If there was 10 people, 5 boys, 5 girls, and they were, 16 to 24-year-olds, and they're all mixing together, they're all friends, and a sister said, "Oh, I'm not feeling well. I've got tummy ache." A boy will say, "Oh, did you not eat something?" Instead of the girl saying, "Oh, actually, I'm on my period and I'm not feeling well," instead of just saying what she's feeling, she'll say, "I've got tummy ache," either expecting the boy to know or trying to hide what's actually going on. And in the past, I've actually said, "Oh, did you not eat something, or you've got a bug or something?" And then it sort of takes a second to actually click. She hasn't got a tummy bug. She's on her menstrual cycle. And if she was a close enough friend, I'd ask, "Why don't you just say you're on your period? Why don't you just say that?" It's all this coded language that I think is actually not healthy about expressing our humanity. We seem to be ashamed of our bodies, and I don't think it's anything that's good. So I know there's dangers about spending time with people of the opposite sex, but I think the risk-reward ratio, for me, I would say that it's safer to be more physically open with your friends than many of us are. I don't think it's wrong to do that in the way that too many of us think that it is wrong. There is a common phrase or term, the one or true love. How do we know who the right one is? Is there such a thing as the number, Mr. Right or Mrs. Right? And I think I've already alluded to this, and I'm saying there is not. I don't believe in this concept that there is one person that is right for you, and all you need to do is wait for that one person. People use this term often. I find it sometimes frustrating, sometimes confusing. Back in the day, so I'm going to use that term, back in the day, I knew girls, conservative girls. I was a conservative person, and they would listen to conservative speakers on marriage counselling. And one of the people, if you're familiar with him, his name was Frizzy, Pastor Frizzy. He's dead now. He's an Adventist pastor, and he used to involve himself or speak on relationships, marriage counselling. and he's not the only one, but they would have all of these terms, like they would express a woman to be like a fruit on a tree, or a book on a shelf in a library. That one's even worse, that imagery. So I'll go with a nicer one, I guess. A fruit on a tree, and this woman is just sitting there waiting for this man to come up and pluck her off the tree and ravish her. And what you'd end up doing is saying, there are some girls that they'd be waiting around a long time. And to try and encourage them, what you'd say is this. You'd say, well, people tend to pick the low-hanging fruit, the easy picks, first. They're the ones that go the first. But it's the ones that are at the top of the tree, the higher ones, the ones that are harder to reach, that take the longest to get. And because you're on the tree for the longest, and you've been closer to the sun, the likelihood that you're going to ripen more and you're going to be a more tasty fruit. So that you can imagine the imagery that's being portrayed there, that the reason that you're there for so long is because you're harder to get, and then you should find more worth. This was all a scam. This was all a scam to tell these sisters who couldn't find, who were waiting and waiting and waiting for a partner to find them, that they had some kind of self-worth. And this is all part and parcel of this idea that there is one true person that's looking out for you. And I think it's a completely erroneous idea. If you were born in a different country, in a different time period, you would have found a completely different partner. So I think this whole idea that there is one true person for you is simply not true. And I think not only is it not true, it's extremely damaging and harmful, because what you end up doing is comparing people with other people. And in your mind, you could have 2 or 3 brothers on the go, thinking, I wonder which one is the right one, which is the better one, the Mr. Right for me. Whereas if you were really thinking about this thing properly, you could marry each one of those 4 or 5 brothers or sisters, whichever way you do it, if you were willing to make a go of this relationship, if you were prepared to put in the effort and the time and the energy, and if you found that person attractive, you could find that you could have a beautiful relationship with any one of those. As I say, there are certain key criteria. There has to be physical attraction. There has to be compatibility, in the sense that you need to have some kind of common interests, which we haven't spent much time considering. But there are some key markers, some key interests. But after that, there are a range of people that you could marry. Different heights, different builds, different skin colours, different cultures even. There's not just a single person out there for you. And I think it's a futile attempt if you are waiting for Mr. Right to come before you say yes. I don't think life actually works that way. So I've run out of time, and we've still got plenty more questions to do. I think I've got another 4 pages of questions. I do try to spend time answering these questions in a bit of detail. Sometimes I repeat the theme. I know I'm repeating a question which is one or similar that I've answered before, but I do that to repeat the idea so it gets reinforced in our minds. It's not just the fact that we've got new people, so it's not an accident where I'll bring up a similar question and answer it. So I don't want to rush through these questions. As long as there's an interest in the movement to speak on these subjects. So I really appreciate if you can give me feedback. As long as I get enough positive feedback that people are being benefited, I'll continue to speak on this subject. And once the interest dies down, I guess I'll go back to prophetic subjects. Not that this is not a prophetic subject, but I guess you know what I mean. Not specifically dealing with relationships. I'll go on to external events or something. Once people begin to lose interest in this, if that happens. So I appreciate your feedback. If you are benefited or find a blessing in in these studies. Oh, and I know it's too soon to say, but if you find a partner and you get happily married and you were blessed by these presentations, please let me know so I can announce it, that I can say, you know what, these studies actually had at least a positive outcome for one couple and it made a difference in their lives. Wouldn't that be really nice if we managed to get to that place? Okay, so with that, 3 minutes over time, and I want to apologise for that. So if you could all join me in prayer. Our Heavenly Father, I want to thank you, Lord, for the privilege of being able to speak about our thoughts, our desires, our feelings, our humanity in a frank and open way with brothers and sisters of like mind. Lord, we know, I know by the questions that I have already had in the past, the questions that I have received that have not yet been answered, that there has been such a pent-up emotion in this movement, in the hearts and minds of brothers and sisters who have wanted to ask questions, but they have not been willing or able to do so, and that these questions now are being poured out, desperate to be answered in this new environment that we find ourselves in this new culture that you have afforded us. It's my hope and my prayer, Lord, that the questions and the answers themselves will prove to be a blessing to each and every one of us, and that whether we are single, already in a courtship, anticipating a courtship, or married, that each of these different groups would be blessed by the material that we're considering and the studies that we're doing. Please continue to guide, bless and direct us. We ask and pray in Jesus' name. Amen.